Welcome to your very own Survivor's Guide to Hell. We're your hosts. I'm Jerry Aubrey.
And I'm PJ Aubrey. We know how hard it is to find good news these days. It comes at a price. Studies show that bad news can amp up your stress hormones, increase your depression, and cause you to be less kind to the people around you. In some cases, it can even increase rates of crime and suicide in your community.
At Survivor's Guide to Hell, we want to help you breathe easier. Each week, we select a difficult topic and then use that topic to help you laugh, help you find a bright side, or even change your perspective for the better.
Today, our unpleasant topic is starting from scratch. There's nothing quite as thrilling and stupefying, inspiring and terrifying as having to make something out of nothing. It's a task that assumes many different forms. For example, a homemaker entering a divorce may look into the vague expanse of her new future and wonder how to construct a life from here. A man jaded with his career of many years may decide it's time to switch jobs, only to realize that any new career would force him to start from scratch. Perhaps you get caught in a web of legal trouble and find yourself stripped of all your resources by the time you're spat out of your last courtroom battle. Or maybe as you approach your next big birthday, you realize your life has a lot of dead ends that need cutting and no clear paths to replace them with. It's hard to know how to feel when the next step is to create something with nothing. It's exciting to consider the possibilities and horrific to contemplate the vulnerabilities. The hardest part is, perhaps, knowing where to even start. It reminds me of a European folk story that's been told at least a half dozen different ways in a half dozen different places. You may have heard it. A traveler enters a village with little more than a cauldron to call his own. Hungry, he visits a few of the townsfolk and asks if they could spare a stranger some food. Time and time again, the traveler is turned down. However, his time exploring the world has taught him to be more clever than most. So, in the center of the village, the traveler propped his cauldron over a fire, filled it with water from a nearby stream, and told some passers-by that he was making stone soup. With that, he tossed a smooth pebble into the heating water. "Stone soup is like nothing you've ever tasted," the traveler explained. "I'd love to share some with you when it's through cooking. Of course, it always does taste a little better with some carrots." One of the intrigued passers-by volunteers some of his own carrots for the huge pot of stone soup. The traveler gratefully accepts, before mentioning how a palmful of garlic would really set it off. Another villager offers a few of her cloves. "Do you know what would taste wonderful with the garlic?" the traveler says. "Just a bit of chicken." The traveler continues to graciously accept each offering, casually mentioning more ingredients that could perfect the soup as more curious villagers step forward and volunteer their resources. Before long, a small crowd has gathered around the cauldron of stone soup, whose bubbling depths are now rolling in carrots, potatoes, garlic, chicken, celery, thyme, peppercorns, salt, broth, basil, and bay leaves. One eager villager has even donated a few loaves of bread to the community meal. After the stone soup has boiled for nearly 2 hours, the clever traveler scoops up the stone and explains to his new companions that it is to be discarded after the soup has finished boiling. Then each townsperson lines up with the bowl and is given a hearty portion of the bone-warming brew, along with a couple slices of bread. The traveler, of course, takes his own serving and enjoys it alongside the villagers. So it was that with a cauldron, a rock, some boiling water, and a little smooth talk, the stranger was not only able to feed himself, but an entire community. The traveler in the parable makes it look so easy, doesn't he? So that homemaker getting a divorce, that man switching careers, the guy getting sued, or the person whose wake-up call style birthday is coming, all they need is what they can carry on their backs and a little trust from the community, right? Well, perhaps that's why they call stone soup a tale and not a how-to guide. Jerry has never heard the European tale of stone soup. Let's ask him what he thinks of the stone soup method. So, all right, so let's imagine something together. Let's say you and I were walking through a public area, like maybe a popular local park. And there's a man there with a Dutch oven and a campfire. Anyone who doesn't know what a Dutch oven is, it's like this cast iron pot that lots of people use to cook in campfires while they're camping.
Mostly the Dutch.
Okay. And he stops us as we walk by and he offers us some of his soup. He calls it stone soup. And you notice in the Dutch oven, there's nothing but boiling water and a rock. So he offers you the stone soup. What is your reaction going to be?
Confusion, probably at first. I would probably think this person is insane.
Okay. I'm guessing you wouldn't eat his soup.
No, I don't think I would partake in drinking of his boiled rock.
His boiled rock. Well, what if he explained that it goes great with carrots? And we happen to have some carrots in our van nearby.
Well, I'm a thinker, so I would automatically think in my head that this guy is a con artist who's asking people to try his soup, and everybody's going to say, well, I have carrots to add, well, I have meat to add, and everybody's going to have something different to add, and pretty soon it won't be rock soup, it'll just be stew.
So...
Pretty ingenious for a homeless guy.
But a con artist.
Or a really hungry person who's intelligent.
Would you get him carrots then?
Well, if he was smart enough to try and do that and pull that kind of scheme, I would probably find something to throw in just because I respect the ability.
Really?
Uh-huh.
I'm really surprised. Okay. Well, that kind of nullifies my next question. I really thought you'd say he was just some crazy person and you weren't giving him squat and we needed to get away pronto.
Well, not if it seems like he's trying to get everybody to pitch in on his rock soup. That's pretty ingenious.
And you've never heard the folktale of stone soup?
No.
Before I conducted that brief interview with Jerry, I thought I knew what he would say, and I actually composed a response under the assumption that he would think the stone soup guy was straight up crazy or even dangerous. It was strangely magical to see him react in a similar way that the villagers did in the folktale itself. So, certainly, starting over isn't as easy as throwing a stone into a boiling cauldron of water. But perhaps the stone soup tale still has a lot it can tell us about how to start from scratch successfully, how to start life over. It goes to show that the ability to create something from nothing, to essentially start from scratch, is something we respect, something we aspire to. Like Jerry said, it takes a certain measure of genius to accomplish. In honor of starting from scratch, we've collected a few real-life, modern-day stone soup stories, minus the fairy tale essence, that may give you some inspiration the next time you need to hit life's reset button. To top you off, we'll also share some undiluted tips and tricks for the next time life asks you to make something from nothing. Grab your cauldrons, your pebbles, and an insane amount of bravery, everybody. We're going to make some modern-day stone soup. Part 1. Gary Kahn, the man who pretended his way into a wealthy Wall Street career. Gary Kahn was a dyslexic kid before anyone was really talking about dyslexic kids. He went to elementary school in the 1970s. The same time he entered first grade, the year teachers really start to dig into reading and writing, Gary was starting his career at another school, the School of Hard Knocks. Here's Dyslexia 101 for those of you that could use some brushing up. The condition is no cakewalk, especially for school kids surrounded by words and letters. Characters start to get shuffled up. For example, now, N-O-W, might look like one, W-O-N, or tab might look like bat. Spaces between words get lost. Sometimes letters seem to be flipped around entirely. B's start looking like D's, while W's might start looking like M's. Mind your P's and Q's is a phrase that takes on a whole new meaning for a child with dyslexia. Reading comprehension plummets for kiddos that have dyslexia, and as you might imagine, so does reading satisfaction. Nowadays, there are forms of therapy to help people manage their dyslexia. But back in Gary's day, the condition was considered to be underdiagnosed and undertreated. All throughout his school career, Gary would have to pay the price for the misunderstandings his condition caused. I was working really, really hard, and no one understood that part of the equation. They literally thought I was conscientiously making decisions to be a disruptive kid, to not learn, to hold the class back, Gary said in Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath. He continues to explain that his parents transferred him from one school to another over and over, searching for a place that might work out for young Gary. He explains, "All my mother wanted me to do was graduate high school. I think if you'd asked her, she'd have said, the happiest day of my life would be if he graduates high school. Then he can go drive a truck, but at least he'll have a high school degree." Not a doctor, not a world-traveling journalist, a successful lawyer, or even a passionate elementary school teacher. A truck driver with a high school diploma. Gary lived in a different world than most of us. It may go without saying that his teachers weren't too fond of him. He tended to search for social esteem by enacting disruptive behaviors, which on one occasion spurred a teacher to force him under her desk and start kicking him. In response, he pushed her chair back, hit her in the face, and walked out of the classroom. This was only 4th grade. He was staring down at least 8 more years of school ahead of him. According to Malcolm Gladwell, on Gary's graduation date, his mother was a fountain of tears. "I've never seen anyone cry so much in my life," Gary said. While most of his peers were learning language arts and mathematics, how to put on makeup, play football, ask someone to prom, etc., Gary had learned something extra. Something that would prove to be more useful than state capitals, how to find X, and the major themes of Homer's Odyssey. Gary was learning how to take nothing and turn it into something. For him, graduating high school with his learning disability was like driving from LA to New York on 1 tank of gas. While most of his peers had the money to refuel, Gary became accustomed to the excruciating work of getting out, shutting the door, and pushing the whole damn car. It really says something about Gary that he went on to college and graduated from American University. At age 22, in order to satisfy his father, he took a job selling window frames and aluminum siding. However, construction materials were a far cry from the true passion Gary had discovered for himself. Perhaps against the expectations of everyone who'd participated in Gary's education, it would turn out that the man had an ardor for financial markets. When his Cleveland job asked him to take a work trip to headquarters in Long Island, New York, Gary saw an opportunity. He asked to have the day after Thanksgiving to himself and used it to travel to Wall Street. Gary had once interned at a local brokerage firm and had developed an interest in trading. Perhaps with the threat of a lifetime of window frames and aluminum siding biting at his heels, Gary traveled to the World Trade Center complex, where the Commodities Exchange was located. Gary tells Malcolm Gladwell, "I think I'm going to get a job, but there's nowhere to go. It's all secure. So I go up to the observation deck and watch the guys and think, can I talk to them? Then I walk down to the floor with a security gate and stand at the security gate like someone's going to let me in. Of course, no one is. And then literally, right after the market's closed, I see this pretty well-dressed guy running off the floor, yelling to his clerk, 'I've got to go. I'm running to LaGuardia. I'm late. I'll call you when I get to the airport.' I jump in the elevator and I say, 'Can we share a cab?' He says, 'Sure.' I think this is awesome. With Friday afternoon traffic, I can spend the next hour in the taxi getting a job." How did Gary find the guts and the quick thinking to make such a bold move? He was a construction guy with a significant learning disability. He had a hard time surviving high school. What made him think that he could survive New York-paced trading? For that matter, what made him think he could survive a single cab ride with a man he dared hope could employ him somewhere? Then again, maybe it was his significant learning disability. Maybe it was that difficulty he had surviving high school that helped him think so quickly on his feet and that gave him the boldness he needed to make such a daring move. He was accustomed to accomplishing very much with very little. Perhaps this dyslexic nobody was the perfect person to jump in the cab with this mysterious somebody from Wall Street. It turned out the man Gary had shared the cab with was high on the food chain with a major brokerage firm that had recently opened a business buying and selling options. As Gary continued to speak with this man, he soon deduced that the guy barely even knew what an option was. "I lied to him all the way to the airport," Gary said. When he said, "Do you know what an option is?" I said, "Of course I do. I know everything. I can do anything for you." Basically, by the time we got out of the taxi, I had his number. He said, "Call me Monday." Gary had just accomplished a feat that is usually reserved for scenes in movies. Running off nothing but his own sheer ingenuity, Gary had arrived on Wall Street and secured an interview with one of the biggest businesses in the biz. That Monday call had landed him an interview scheduled for Wednesday. Now there was only one small detail to consider. Gary didn't know a damn thing about options. Gary found Macmillan's Options as a Strategic Investment book, which he described as the Bible of options trading, and proceeded to devour it. That is, as much as a man with dyslexia can devour a book. This was no cat in the hat either. This was a 1,072-page book with a title that could scare even established readers back to the Harry Potter section of the bookstore. For Gary, who postulates that he can read 22 pages in 6 hours at best, it was a gargantuan task. By the time he had appeared for his interview, he had picked tediously through the book, sentence by sentence, sometimes word by word. Gary got the job. He describes the situation like this. "I literally stood behind him and said, 'Buy those, sell those, sell those.' I never owned up to him what I did. Or maybe he figured it out, but he didn't care. I made him tons of money." The dyslexic Ohio nobody, who had once been deemed so disruptive and useless that his teacher abused him under her desk, is now estimated to be worth between $251 and $611 million. He's involved in several philanthropic pursuits, from funding adolescent psychiatry to founding scholarships. You might say he lives on top of the world, and not because of his pedigree, education, or socioeconomic background. Gary Kahn is a man who learned how to make something from nothing. What about you? What could you do with a bit of guts, a load of work ethic, and a whole lot of nothing? Here's an editor's note for you. As we touched on before, most of the information from this act came from a book by Malcolm Gladwell. The full title, which is David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants, is a superb read. We're not getting paid to say this, but we highly recommend taking a look.
Hello, amazing listener. You may have heard us talk about Operation Positivity Poddemic, which is our goal to more than double our audience by December 31st, 2022. What do you say? Join our operation? One simple way is to follow us on Facebook. It's a win-win. You'll get convenient access to exclusive updates and contents. It'll be easier for new listeners to discover and enjoy a dose of our silver linings. Just type A Survivor's Guide to Hell in a Facebook search bar and click follow.
Part 2. How one mother stole an entire room in her church building, and no one noticed.
While our last story came from high up the Wall Street food chain, our next true tale is a little more personal. It comes from the same place my wife came from, my mother-in-law Rosemary. She's quite a talented writer, and you can find the full written account in her blog. Though Rosemary now considers herself an agnostic, she was once a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You may know them as Mormons. It was in one of these Mormon church buildings that Rosemary starts her tale. Unfortunately, Rose contracted the Omicron variant just days before recording, so you'll be hearing her from her home microphone.
Before we dive into her story, it would be helpful for you to know a little bit about the layout of a typical Mormon church building. The very center of the building is usually made up of a chapel, where the main worship service happens, and a gymnasium. Surrounding the chapel and gymnasium is one looping hallway, and on the other side of that hallway are lots and lots of classrooms. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints emphasizes building families. So at some point in their history, they have also emphasized having lots and lots of children. That may be why most of their church buildings are equipped with a mother's room. a small place where mommies can go to nurse babies in cushy rocking chairs, change a diaper on the fold-out table, and help calm down particularly rowdy little ones. It's a clean room, it's a private room, and it has a speaker that will broadcast whatever service is going on in the chapel. With those bits of Mormon trivia, you're ready for the story.
So, when I was living in Ogden, Utah, this was in the mid-90s, I attended this Mormon church that didn't have a mother's room anywhere in the building. I know, we're talking about the Mormon church, who are kind of really big on having babies, and yet in this one particular building, there was no mother's room. No place for a mother to rock a baby, or feed a baby, or even change a baby's diaper. What they did have was a brown metal folding chair wedged between the sink and a bathroom stall in the ladies' room. And that was pretty much it. And even then, you would have to wait for that chair to open up. So it wasn't the best circumstances, but it's what we made do with. So anyway, one day I am at church and one of my children is acting up during the services. And so I take this child out into the hall and I kind of sneak into this empty classroom so that I can help this child calm down. And while I'm in there, I notice that I can still hear the meeting that's going on in the chapel. And I realize that it is being piped in through a speaker that's on the ceiling. And I think, oh my gosh, this would be the perfect mother's room. And so, as soon as I can, I start talking to all the priesthood leaders about my discovery and my idea. And they're actually really supportive and they think it's a great idea too. But then everything starts to get kind of delegated and redelegated to the point that I really became disillusioned. And I kind of let my disillusionment turn into audacity. At that point, I went to a sign shop and I ordered a sign that said Mother's Room. And I made sure that it matched all the other signs in the building, the font and the plaque style and everything. And so I had this sign made. And then one night, I just took my drill and my 3 children over to the church. And I proceeded to drill this sign into the door of the room that I found. Then I dragged out all of the classroom chairs and started pulling in the nice upholstered chairs from the foyer, 2 or 3. I also went around the building and found some of my favorite paintings that were hanging on the walls, and I moved those into this room as well. And it kind of shaped up to be a nice little mother's room. I even put a garbage can in there for the diapers and whatnot. So then I sat back and waited for the repercussions. Like, I was pretty sure there was going to be some letter read from the pulpit or something like that. But you know what? Nothing. The only thing that really did happen as a result of that is the high priest group leader, who I guess had been using that classroom for his quorum. He wrote a mean-spirited little note on the chalkboard once, but that was just easily erased. And then I never heard anything about it again. And let me tell you, I was delighted to go back a few years later to attend a 20-year reunion in that building. And I kind of snuck out of the party for a second and I went to that room to see if it was still the mother's room. And it was just as I had created it, except they had added a real changing table as well. So that's the story of the mother's room.
I've got a rebel soul. I've got a rebel soul. I've got a rebel soul.
Part 3. 4 ideas to help you start from scratch. When life tells you it's time to create something out of nothing, sometimes the most difficult part is knowing where to start. It doesn't matter if you're trying to create a painting out of a blank canvas or create life out of your ambiguous future. How do you begin when there's literally thousands of options and no guidebook for what should happen next? If you've ever asked yourself these questions, then this list is for you.
4 ideas to help you start from scratch. Number 1, rearrange your room. Deliberating how to create something from nothing is a heavyweight mental task. However, to prime the environment in your mind, you'd do best to begin with the environment outside your head. And what better place to start than your room? Psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carrie Barron, author of a book titled The Creativity Cure: How to Build Happiness with Your Own 2 Hands, is a big advocate for rearranging your room. She says that rearranging the furniture and decluttering your environment lifts mood, provides concrete satisfaction, and instills a sense of effectiveness. Dr. Barron goes on to explain that rearranging your room helps you hone your aesthetic identity, lending you a sense of clarity and a feeling of being grounded. Remember, you're attempting to grow something new that never existed before, whether it's a small business or a new way of life. The space around you is the soil for this new growth. Mood elevation, as well as a sense of effectiveness, identity, and groundedness, are ideal nutrients to support you. And who knows, perhaps as you use some good old-fashioned hard work to reorganize that room of yours, you'll be struck with the inspiration you've been looking for.
Number 2, set boundaries. Organizing your environment in a fresh new way isn't just about moving furniture. It's about recognizing boundaries and using those boundaries to create a space where you can flourish. Here's the thing about reasonable boundaries. While they first may seem to be obstacles that curtail your freedom, they have this funny way of arousing your creativity and getting you results. Let's say you've been given a large canvas, multiple brushes, limitless colors of paint, and no further instruction. Situations like this have paralyzed many an artist who may spend weeks, even months, deliberating what to create next with the literal infinity of possibilities. But what happens when you add a few boundaries? Paint a modern spin of a classic work of art. Voila! With that boundary, now your mind is calling up all kinds of classic works. Maybe Mona Lisa is taking a selfie, or perhaps you see Jesus and his disciples in Last Supper with their lumps of bread replaced with a DoorDash bag and Panda Express takeout. Just like that, your task has been simplified. All you need to do is pick up some boundaries that match the effect you're trying to achieve. This is a significant task, but it's much more bite-sized than trying to divine a single idea from a background of endless possibilities. The same principles apply to nearly any project that challenges you to start from scratch. Ask yourself the following questions to help determine some relevant boundaries. What is the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish? What are the things you're willing to risk? What are the things you're not willing to risk? How can you do it in a way that's true to your values? How can you do it in a way that helps you fulfill your passions or answer your curiosities? What resources do you have to work with? All these questions could lead to boundaries that will help you channel your creativity and drive you toward your end goals.
Number 3, travel somewhere you've never been. In the last point, we talked about the virtues of reasonable boundaries when you're trying to create something from nothing. However, sometimes our boundaries get unreasonable. Often, us humans have a hard time thinking outside the box and stepping out of our mental patterns and ruts. One remedy? Putting your body in an unfamiliar place. Your mind will have no choice but to follow. If you're starting from scratch and don't know how to tackle a particular challenge, maybe you should see how they tackle a similar challenge in Germany. Looking for ideas to start a business? Perhaps you should see what kind of businesses have worked in France. That's how Starbucks coffee shop started, by the way. Looking for a new lifestyle altogether? Well, how do people live in Peru? Of course, we don't all have the time, money, and COVID vaccination cards to get that passport and hop on a plane. But what about the nearest big city you've never been to? Or that small town an hour north of your house that you've never learned how to pronounce? Maybe it's time to pack some snacks to keep you sharp, find a babysitter and a good podcast, and hit the road to visit one of those places. If even a mini road trip is out of your scope, but you still want to give your mind a kick of creativity to help you start from scratch, hang tight. This next idea is just for you.
Number 4, do something out of the ordinary. When you're starting something from scratch, another way to shake yourself from your brain's patterns is to do something that's unusual for you. Do you have a passion for trains? You don't? Perfect. Time to visit the local railroad museum. Do you speak any Asian languages or have a passion for cooking authentic Eastern cuisine? No? Excellent. Go visit your nearest Asian marketplace and take a thorough look around. Are you more of an indoor person than an outdoor person? Yes? Wonderful. Go take a hike. Unusual activities have the same virtues as traveling to a foreign place. They can lend you ideas that your same old routine never would. But it doesn't end with borrowed ideas. If you force your brain to twist in unusual ways, it's much easier to climb out of your mental cages and come up with something original. You can do this without even leaving your home. The weirder you get, the better. Here's some ideas you can accomplish without even leaving your front door. Pick a letter of the alphabet. Throughout the day, use as many words that start with the letter as you can possibly think of. Spend some time analyzing objects that never caught your attention before. For example, find a stone and study the rifts and interruptions in its surface for a few minutes, or pick up a children's toy and use all of your senses to understand it on a deeper level. Lay on a bed or couch and let your head hang off the edge so the world looks upside down. Spend a few minutes studying your surroundings this way. Choose a day not to speak at all. Buy a cheap art or science kit that you'd never have been interested in otherwise and complete it.
That is the end of today's stories. Now we want you to join us for our weekly Silver Liners Challenge, which is designed to be an easy, actionable step that you can take to help boost your week and help you survive hell.
Here it is, the Silver Liners Challenge. Do something bold this week.
Feel free to share your experiences in the comments of our website, survivorsguidetohell.com, or on our corresponding YouTube video.
You know how this goes. We're always looking for cool news stories. If you've recently stumbled on something that has fascinated you in a positive way, chances are it'll do the same for others. Whether it's a brief fact or a full-fledged story, send us your silver lining ideas via survivorsguidetohell@gmail.com. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe. Gone are the days that you have to go searching for episodes. They'll be delivered right to the place you listen to your podcast. Just find our podcast on your listening application and click subscribe or follow.
If you like Survivor's Guide to Hell and would like to help spread the positivity, then you're already doing the best thing you can do just by listening. We've also seen amazing results when our listeners share our episodes with others. Whether it's on social media or in person, if this episode made you think of someone, send it their way. They may be grateful for it, and we will be too.
Last but not least, our cheesy joke of the week.
What's the best way to make a small fortune in the stock market?
Start off with a big one.
Thank you, and have an excellent day.